friends, I'm Dr. Rachel Tapman, and this is my YouTube channel, which is for anybody who cares about language technology and other people. And if you're in that group of folks, you probably already don't want to build intentionally harmful language technology, but maybe you talk to people who do, and this might be a helpful, set of points to make about why we maybe shouldn't do that. So to start off with, let's talk about the system that triggered this. So I didn't actually want to talk about this today. I had other things planned, but people do stuff, and it's important to set community norms. So a YouTuber, and I'm not gonna share their name or link to their channel. You can find it if you really want to, but they did this for attention, and I don't intend to give it to them. Trained a large language model based on GPT on a board from 4chan. So 4chan, if you're unfamiliar, is like an online forum where people delight in being awful, is how I would put that. And then that model was used to generate text. That text was re-uploaded to the board, is my understanding, and then the model itself was open sourced. And if you are wondering about what sorts of things that this model might produce, there's an example. So these are folks sharing about it on Twitter from Catherine Kramer, who tested it using a tweet and got a output that was containing some very offensive language. If you're not familiar, the N-word is routinely in sort of, studies of offensiveness considered the most offensive word in the English language, and it is a slur against Black folks. So not something, A, that I think Catherine would say, and B, that is really acceptable to say, period. And I should say that the model has been removed from Hugging Face, so it was open sourced, it's been removed, it's no longer available through this platform. So that's where we are. Somebody built something that generates hate speech, they open sourced it, it's no longer available open source. So why do I think this is a problem? I mean, I think there's a couple problems with this, but I don't just want this to be like, hey, this is my opinions, although, I mean, presumably you care a little bit about my opinions because you're here on my YouTube channel. So in situations like this, I think there can be individual reactions to it, but then also there's the larger professional reaction to it. So I think it can be helpful to look at professional organizations and the standards that they propose. So the ACM is the Association for Computing Machinery, I believe. And it's probably the most well-known of and largest of the professional associations for people working in computing. And their code of ethics, which they updated in 2018, is a collection of principles and guidelines designed to help computing professionals make ethically responsible decisions in professional practice. So why would you want to do that? Well, when you make ethical decisions, it benefits the profession as a whole. It helps to, maintain community trust. It helps maintain social trust in our profession. It, helps legislatures see that it's something that it is valuable to continue to allow us to do. And, it improves society, or at least doesn't worsen it, ideally. And in the ACM Code of Ethics, there are a couple things where I think this project really does violate that Code of Ethics. And I think you can say, well, it was a YouTuber, but they were doing this as part of their work, right? To gain more YouTube views, and that's how they're supporting themselves. And I would say that is being in the computing profession. I don't know if this person is an ACM member or not, but if they are or have ever been, then presumably they might be familiar with the Code of Ethics and might know that they are, violating it. So, first of all is avoid harm. So avoiding negative consequences, including mental injury, I think is the one that's most relevant in this situation. So this system is intentionally designed to be a hate speech producer, to create new hate speech, basically. And you might say, well, okay, it's just words, sticks and stones may break my bones, etc. But we do have evidence that reading hate speech online can cause people psychological distress. So this is a paper actually published by the ACM, right? So they're a scholarly organization as well, looking at the psychological effects of hateful speech in online college communities. And this was actually, the study was looking at Reddits about specific colleges. I'm just going to pick out a couple little passages from here. So one is just from the literature review. In addition to being a precursor to potential hate crimes and violence, hateful speech and its exposure can have profound psychological impacts, so mental harm, on a campus's reputation, climate, and morale, such as heightened stress, anxiety, depression, and desensitization. And then victimization, direct or indirect, has also been associated with increased rates of alcohol and drug use. And you may say like, okay, well, that's looking at hateful speech, but it's not necessarily happening online. What about in this online situation? And that's what they looked at in this study. So the group that was exposed to the online hate speech had a revealed difference in stress between the two groups, the control and then the test, following online hate exposure, suggesting that exposure likely had a causal relationship with the online stress expression of the users, right? So people, displayed more symptoms of stress in their online behavior after being exposed to hate speech, which again, psychological harm, mental harm. And then the model was open sourced. So not only does that, create the potential for harm, it then widely distributes the tools to do that harm. Another thing that I think is a point that this, project didn't really adhere to is to be honest and trustworthy. And the reason that I think that this was, not followed is because the system was deployed to produce language in a situation where people interacting with that language production would assume it had been produced by another person, right? So it was a deceptive use of the technology. And then finally, respecting privacy, right? So the data of the users of 4chan was used, presumably without their permission or knowledge. And you may see like, well, okay, it's 4chan, people are, not very polite there. I don't think it's an issue that, their privacy is not being respected, which I would say that, if this is something that maybe you were thinking about, if a right only applies to people that you like, it's not a right. If you think that online data privacy is important and control over the use and reuse of data is a important thing for people to be able to have, then it has to be everybody's use and reuse, right? Including folks saying horrible things. So as, discussion has been happening, there's been a couple points that I've seen coming up about like, well, actually, maybe it was a good thing that this happened, which I don't agree with. That might be clear from the discussion so far. But one thing that's come up a lot is that you can use models like this, like hate speech generators, for red teaming. So basically pretending to be a bad actor, which I would say, yes, you very well could train a model like this for that reason. That's not why this model was trained. This model was trained to make a YouTube video to get views and to create discussion. Congratulations, it worked. And also, if you were doing that and that was your aim, you probably wouldn't be releasing that model publicly in order to make it accessible to everyone to, create the hate speech that then you're defending against, right? It's really hard to argue that it was a good thing to do to release something when the benefit of releasing it is that you can potentially mitigate some of the harms of the system itself, right? Much easier just not to build the system, just not to release the system in the first place. And then another, sort of point that comes up in these discussions often is that, well, Rachel, you can't just tell people what to do. You can't decide what's right and wrong. And they say, yeah, of course not. Like there are plenty of things that I would not work on that, fall within things that would be reasonable or acceptable within the purviews of, say, different professional societies or, other folks. So I'm not queen of the world. I'm not suggesting that I am. But at the same time, I'm part of a discipline and I'm part of a social group of peers who work together. And as a discipline, we get to collectively set norms, right? If everyone, if it was completely unusual for someone to give a talk without wearing a hat, everyone would wear a hat, right? That's a social norm that's constructed by the community that just doesn't exist, right? In fact, I think the opposite. It would be a little weird if you did show up to a conference and gave a talk in a hat. But we get to collectively set those norms and we get to decide what we will accept. And I'd say that this is a poor use of the technology. And I'd also say that, everyone's going to have their own ethical framework and it's going to be informed by their, social relationships and their larger, place in the world. But anybody can do whatever they want, no matter how harmful it might be to others, is really not a good or useful norm, and it really is not sustainable. So if you are working in a community, that is not a good way to create a healthy community. That's a way to create a community that people leave and leave quickly. And it also provides a pretty strong incentive for people outside of that community to, censure that community, to try and prevent it from harming others outside the community. Maybe legislation that would really curtail the ability of people in that community to continue to do whatever activity it is that they're doing, right? And I think a good litmus test is in a situation like this where there's a project and you're like, well, maybe I should do it, maybe I shouldn't. If everyone in the world thought that this was a good idea and did this, would the world be better or worse, right? Are you working towards the sort of world you want to live in, or are you working towards Not that. Are you working towards a world you kind of don't want to live in, but you're kind of just like doing it anyway? Anyway, so just like a final little wrap up, some things to consider. So this is like assuming that you don't want to build this model and you're looking at evaluating a model like this, some questions you can ask yourself. So A, why did they do this in the first place? I mean, clicks. please don't go watch the video. I would prefer that you not. They wanted attention, and like I said, they got it. What are the benefits of the model? I mean, potentially learning how to mitigate attacks from a model like this exact model perhaps, because it's now available. And then, but what are the harms of the model? And in this case, I think the harms of the model are absolutely outweighing the benefits of the model. So A, it's designed to produce hate speech, and it produces hate speech. I use the example of a puppy kicker, like a machine that kicks puppies, as something that's sort of universally agreed upon to be bad. I would say that just producing hate speech is sort of universally agreed upon to be bad. The data collection violated users' privacy, right? Things were done to their data without their consent or knowledge. It produced deceptive text, so it was dishonest towards users in that community. The harms that occurred to the community have already occurred, but it really opens up the ability for more harms to come to other people outside of the community. So it doesn't really require any prompt engineering, right? So if you'll remember Catherine's example, it was a completely benign tweet that was input. What came out was hate speech. And it was open source, which means, you know, at this point, who knows how many copies of this model are out there? Who knows how much has been trained with it? It makes it really easy to scale and automate the harm, which is bad. So that's the story. I hope that I've convinced you that building systems that exist to do bad things is a bad thing to do, and that you won't do that. That's my hope. Yeah. So thanks for joining me. I hope this was informative. I don't want to say enjoyable. I did not like talking about this. I would prefer not to have, but there we go. And I'll be back on Thursday for our weekly roundup of NLP topics and machine learning topics. Thanks so much. I'll see you Thursday, and stay safe and stay healthy. Bye.